Morning, and thank you all for joining us for our very first webinar of 2026. My name is Sharon, and I'm with SIPA, your Colorado government authority, helping you get more information and services online and offering Colorado government's grant funding. In today's webinar, Terry Bradley of Mile High Cyber will be sharing best practices for cybersecurity that you can start doing now for little cost. Before we get started, please go ahead and turn on captioning if you need or desire, and note that during this webinar you are muted. If you have any questions or would like to communicate with Terry at any point during the webinar, please use the chat or the Q&A function. We'll unmute folks at the end if you want to ask any questions. We'll also have 4 poll questions for you to answer during the presentation and a post-webinar survey, and we hope you'll provide your feedback. Please join me in welcoming Terry, to whom we are grateful for sharing his time and expertise. Also on the call is SIPA's Sales and Marketing Director, Beth Justice, and Customer Success Director, Dwayne Tucker, if you have any questions for us. Thank you again for joining us today, and with that, I will turn it over to our guest.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you for taking some time to come to the webinar today and to talk about some low-cost ways to make some tangible improvements in your cybersecurity program. Before I dive into the material, I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself, where I'm coming from when I talk about cybersecurity. I got my start in cybersecurity back in the 90s, working for the U.S. Air Force and the National Security Agency. I was a signals intelligence officer, and when I got out of the military, I went to work at the NSA as a cybersecurity vulnerability analyst. And at the NSA, I learned how attackers find flaws in software and networks. And I did that for the NSA for several years. Went back in 2010 as a computer network attack planner at US Cyber Command. And so when I talk about cybersecurity, I'm coming at it from a fairly technical standpoint in terms of vulnerabilities, software and security flaws, misconfigurations in networks, and things like that. In 2020, I founded Mile High Cyber. We're a SIPA registered partner here in Colorado Springs, and we provide cybersecurity services, a lot of penetration testing and application penetration testing, which I'll talk about briefly in the webinar today. So that's me. In terms of today's presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about what your goals are or what they should be in terms of cybersecurity, because if you don't know where you're going, just about any road will get you there. So we'll talk about setting some goals, using the resources that you already have, and then also coming up with some ways to prioritize the things that you need to do in a short period of time in many cases. All right, so let's start with what's your goal? When we meet with new customers, a lot of times they don't know where to begin. And so maybe you have some really basic goals like not getting hacked, not getting fired. Those are important goals, but they're not necessarily super actionable. And so what we recommend is kind of starting out with some fundamental concepts of how do you protect your data. And probably the most basic framework that we can discuss is this CIA triad. So protecting your data, the confidentiality of it. A lot of people have information that's not public, whether it's financial information, employee personal identifiable information, maybe student information, medical information. So protecting the confidentiality of that information is one important goal. Protecting the availability of that data, making sure that it's there when you need it. This is one of the things that we're concerned about with ransomware. If bad guys come in and take over the network and lock up your data and make it unavailable to you, in many cases that shuts down the organization, makes the organization not able to operate or fulfill its mission. And then integrity is also another concern. How do we know that the information that we're retrieving from our systems is truly accurate, hasn't been altered, changed, or corrupted? And so these are the basic principles of information security. But kind of like the fundamental, I don't want to get hacked or I don't want to get fired, they're not necessarily super actionable. Okay, so how do you ensure the confidentiality? Well, that takes some planning. But before we dive into anything else, we're going to have a poll question. All right, here's the first question. If you're on the call right now, which area do you think represents the highest current risk to your organization? We'll give a minute for that, and I'm going to rely on Sharon to tell me when that is done. We need some Jeopardy music here to
We sure do, don't we?
pass the time.
All right, looks like we've got our answers in, and there we are.
All right. Well, interesting. Most of you seem to think that email and user identity is the biggest risk to your organization. I think that's pretty accurate. We're going to talk about prioritization, and I think this reveals what a lot of people instinctively know that email and passwords and credentials, that's where the bad guys can reach out and touch you from 1,000 miles away or further. And that is definitely a top concern. So I'm glad to see that a lot of you have tracked in on that right away. All right. So we've got some fundamental ideas about information security. We know that even if we have some goals in protecting our confidentiality, integrity, and availability, those are not necessarily easily actionable at a more granular level. So a lot of practitioners, I think if you went out and asked ChatGPT, where do I begin? They would recommend a security framework. But unfortunately, in my experience, especially for smaller organizations, this is just too much. In the graphic here, we've got some of the famous frameworks out there, NIST, CSF. Of course, if you're in the defense world, CMMC, ISO, and even CIS can be very difficult to implement if you don't have things set up already. And so, even though many practitioners will want you to sign up for a framework approach, unless you're actually required to by regulation, we recommend something a little bit more simple to begin with. And we'll get to that in a second. But if you remember the overview slide, not only is it important to figure out what you're trying to do, but also how quickly you need to get there. A lot of times, organizations are under the gun or under pressure to put together a cybersecurity program, maybe for a compliance reason or because of a security incident. And as you know, there's trade-offs involved in the timing of building any sort of a program or doing any sort of a project. Put another way, if you if you need it fast and it's got to be good, it's not going to be cheap. And so, for a lot of organizations, if you're cost sensitive, and really who isn't nowadays, if you want to get it cheap, it's probably going to take you a little bit of time. And so, as we go into the webinar and talk about how we approach building your cybersecurity program or improving it, having a plan that's phased over time so you can show continued progress is one of the ways you can keep the cost down. Because if you've got to have it by the end of the quarter, by the end of the year, it's probably going to cost you a lot of money. All right. And then finally, before we get to the real meat of the approach, I also want to point out, and you know very well, that you don't live in a vacuum. While you're building your cybersecurity program, while you're trying to improve your protections, you're actually being attacked. And not only by external attackers, the real world threat actors out there that are constantly scanning and probing your systems and possibly even operating within your network, but you've also got users. You can't necessarily increase password complexity or strength or institute MFA without users pushing back. And of course, even in the best of worlds where you get management buy-in and the users love the idea of better security, there's also Murphy's Law. So sometimes these projects don't work as intended, products don't work as intended. And so this is a very difficult problem. This is not just putting it down on a piece of paper and pushing the easy button for improved cybersecurity. So what I want to put forward to you is, even though this is a very daunting task, the most important thing that you could do is to get started right away. And from an engineering perspective, although I wouldn't call myself an engineer, it's important to break this problem into smaller tasks. And so that way you can not only make actual progress, but also show progress to your leadership in your reporting and also in measuring actual risk reduction. And so we're going to talk about what I think is a really great framework. I didn't invent this. I credit Bruce Schneier with this approach, but I think this makes a lot of sense and will help you sort out your priorities and your actions and the protections that you're going to put in place in your organizations. And so this is the basic framework that I'd like to talk about today. Prevent, detect, and respond. Sometimes you'll see it as protect, detect, and respond. But essentially, the first box, prevention, is trying to prevent bad things from happening. And if you think about it as you protect your own home where you live, this is kind of the approach that most people follow. If we want to keep bad people out of our house, we install locks and maybe additional locks, and we lock them at night. And we close our windows and we lock them. We close the garage door at night. We don't leave the back door to the house or the apartment open. We try to prevent bad people from getting in the house. And a lot of our, protections of our house focus on these preventative measures. If you want more protection, if you want to have more assurance that bad people won't get in and take your things or cause you harm, then you move on to detection. You exhaust prevention. You can't build a moat around your house. You probably are not going to string razor wire or over your fence. You realize that you're hitting diminishing returns in prevention. And so if you want more, you need to go to detection. And that would be cameras and motion sensors, maybe break glass sensors, things that are going to tell you that your prevention measures have failed. And now that there's, something bad happening, you want to know about it. You want to know about it quickly. And then ideally, you want to have some response planned. So when the detection mechanisms go off, you want to have some response planned. Maybe that's the police being called or a security force being summoned to your house. And so prevent, detect, and respond are the basic steps in protecting your house. And those all have corollaries in cybersecurity as well. If you're thinking about your own cybersecurity protections in your organization, you've probably put a lot of time and money into prevention, but maybe you haven't thought so much about detection. I think a lot of products, at least in the early days, but a lot of the products that I see coming on the market still are very much focused on prevention. We're going to make it impossible for you to be hacked. We're going to make your passwords stronger. We're going to, implement MFA or other authorization mechanisms to prevent bad guys from getting into your network, even if your passwords are compromised. We don't spend a lot of time on detection, and the response is almost overlooked. If you're in a very large organization and maybe you have some compliance requirements to have an incident response plan, to have an incident response retainer, you've probably worked on this a little bit. But if you're a small organization, response is probably very much overlooked. So let's talk a little bit about these different areas that you could work in your cybersecurity protections. And we'll start with prevent. I think the most important mechanism and one that you can implement for a very low cost is multi-factor authentication. And when I say implement and enforce MFA, I mean everyone and everywhere. One of the most common things we find when we're working with customers and we're assessing their security, looking for gaps in their security protections, is we find that MFA, although available, is not turned on. And if it is turned on, it's not required. So it's important in your organization to not only make it available to your users, but also require users to use it through enforcement mechanisms. And when I say everywhere, I mean all the places that you can possibly use it, you need to be using it. One of the common things that we see when we do assessments of organizations is accounts that are missing MFA, maybe service accounts, maybe a scanner account that scans files to email. But we find accounts that are missing MFA. And if we're able to get into those accounts at the user level, it won't be very long until we become administrator and are in a position to do some serious damage, which of course we won't do because we're ethical, but we're emulating the attacker and we find that MFA is missing in many cases. Second of all, removing unnecessary internet-facing services. If you have a corporate website, you're hosting it with some virtual provider, a lot of times those servers come with all kinds of network services that you don't need. Databases facing the internet, FTP services, which are by nature not secure in terms of how you authenticate to them. And so removing some of those internet-facing ports and then restricting the ones that you can. Maybe you have a VPN, but not everyone in the entire world needs to be able to try to log into it. Restricting that down to, a set of IP addresses that you know are authorized to use those services, or maybe in some cases, using geo-blocking or geofencing to limit those services to specific geographic regions or blocking ones that your users are not coming from. And the final thing that I think you can do for a low amount of money and really makes a huge impact in preventing bad things from happening on your network and to your data is making sure that your administrators don't use their system administrator, their super user admin accounts for their daily driver. So a lot of times, out of convenience, out of laziness, we'll call it, system administrators will use this all-powerful admin account to surf the web, to check their email, to communicate with outside parties of the organization. Um, we always recommend having a separate account for administrator activities. In many cases, you can create these admin accounts without using a license. You can create an unlicensed account in Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace using their cloud identity. And this is a low-cost way to limit the blast radius of those accounts getting compromised. And so, in terms of low-cost things that you can do, things that you probably are already paying for or have available to you, here are three preventative measures that you can do in a very short amount of time to improve your cybersecurity. And with that, we're going to take a moment for another poll question. Looks like I've got these out of particular order, so apologize for that. Poll question number 3.
How confident are you that you would know quickly if a compromise occurred? Hmm. All right, I'm liking these answers. And here we are.
All right, somewhat confident. That's really good to hear. We're going to talk a little bit about detection, and this is, like I said, actually the question that goes with the detection section of the briefing, but that's really good to hear. And I think that in recent years we've seen a big surge, especially within government organizations, to implement and deploy endpoint detection and response, maybe some network intrusion detection, and in many cases, having an outside provider monitor that. So monitored detection and response, MDR.
That'd be good to get those not very confident up to somewhat or very confident.
Yeah. And confidence is a funny thing. Sometimes people are very confident that they've got this covered, and when they do some testing of their protections, they find out they don't have it covered as well as they thought. But we'll talk about that at the end. All right. So moving on to detection. Again, we're trying to talk about ways that you can do this in a low-cost manner. a lot of the talk about detection goes back to SIM and or SIEM. A lot of people will call it security incident or security information and event management. This is that single pane of glass, that system that ingests all of your alerts and logs and gives you a picture of what's happening on your network. But without even spending six figures or more on SIM, you can turn on a lot of alerting. Microsoft 365 has a lot of alerting that's not turned on by default. Some of the things that we recommend to customers that can make a high impact without, really spending any money is turning on alerting to monitor for email rule creation. In most business email compromise attacks, the attackers are creating some sort of a filtering rule to hide email traffic that reveals their activities. So if an attacker breaks into an email box and starts sending out false invoices or trying to change routing information, account information to change where payments go, a lot of times they'll reroute any emails related to those topics to a folder that the user won't see, maybe the RSS feeds folder or a special folder that they've created. And so alerting on email rule creation is a really great low-cost way to detect business email compromise or account takeover attacks. Google has a lot of information in the admin console that by default is not turned on. You just need to go in there and turn that on, have those sent to administrators. It may be a bit of a nuisance to get additional emails, but you can filter those to a folder as well. And this is a really low cost way to take advantage of what you're already paying for. And many applications as well have alerting features built in, file sharing applications and other applications that are, very important to your security. Second thing that we would recommend in trying to do this detection to improve your cybersecurity would be to find the log files and to review them. As a pen test company, as a cybersecurity consulting firm, we do a lot of application penetration tests, and we're constantly amazed that people don't notice that we're sending millions of queries or API calls to their applications, which is out of the ordinary, a great increase over what would typically be seen, and they're not noticed. Firewall logs are extremely important that you have firewall log monitoring turned on and that you're storing those logs if you ever have a security incident. Those firewall logs of when things went into your network and when things went out are going to be very important. And then in almost any sort of a business email compromise or Microsoft 365 security event, sign-in logs are extremely important. And just, I think at the typical level, you should be able to go back 90 days in Microsoft 365 and see who logged in. Not only user interactive logins, but application non-interactive logins. And many times those Microsoft sign-in logs tell quite a story. One of our first cases that we worked with a customer where they had a business email compromise. They lost a great deal of money. They weren't sure when it started or how it happened. And just logging into Microsoft 365 and looking at the sign-in logs told a picture of Nigerian-based hackers that were using VPNs based out of Dallas and Paris and London to get access to email boxes, to move laterally, to create filtering rules. This was all there for anyone who bothered to look. And of course, after that, those logs were monitored a lot more closely. So find those logs and set up a daily task to review them, to look for anomalies and anything suspicious. And then the final thing I recommend in the detection category is look for your open ports. There are services like Shodan that are extremely low cost that you can set up to monitor your internet-facing ports for any changes, for new ports that may have been allowed through your firewall. You can do active vulnerability scans from a virtual host, and you can also sign up even for free vulnerability scanning through CISA. This is a little known service. You can get it as a government entity, and you can also, I think, even some commercial entities that serve government can get this vulnerability scanning for free. Now, it's not the end all be all solution. They're going to send you a report every month with things that are wrong, and they're not going to provide any explanation or any help fixing them. But again, from a low cost perspective, this is a great way to start seeing what your exposure is to the internet. All right, we've got another poll question coming up, and I apologize, I got them in the wrong order. So we're kind of going to go back to that prevent stage and talk about MFA. I'm very interested to hear among those who are on the call today, uh, how are you guys standing with MFA? How would you describe your current usage of MFA within your environment?
This is definitely a good one to do. And actually, in our most recent newsletter, we have a blog post about passkeys, which I am really loving because then I don't have to go and open up an app or type in something extra. I just literally use my finger.
That's really nice. I also love that very much. Every time Microsoft prompts me for MFA, I curse those security people that are making my life uh, inconvenient. That I remember I am one of those security people.
Uh-huh.
All right, enforced for all users and admins. Nearly half, well, actually a little bit more than half, have got it enforced for all users and admins, and that's really great. If you don't have it in place, um, you you definitely need to look into this. And I will say also that 2 or 3 years ago, MFA was the big push. You need to get it, you need to turn it on, you need to enforce it. I will just mention, not to discourage you, but to give you a little reality. There are many ways to bypass MFA. So if you're not even enforcing it, you're in a really bad place because advanced proxies, advanced adversary in the middle proxies and attack techniques can not only steal passwords through fake login pages, but also cookies, cloud tokens that trick your protections into thinking that someone's already performed the MFA challenge. So if you're not doing MFA, you need to do that. And then you also probably need to be going beyond that. But let's just work on the low cost stuff today. All right, so we're getting down to the end here. Respond. Remember, we're trying to keep the bad people out of our house, or out of our network, out of our data. We want to detect when it happens because despite our best efforts, things go wrong. Um, Ports get opened, protections get turned off, protections fail to work. There might be blind spots in your network. So detection doesn't always work. And so when we do get a detection event, we want to make sure that we're ready to respond. And I think the best thing you can do immediately in the response category is create a one-page incident response plan. Now, if you've already got an incident response plan, it's probably more than one page. But if you don't have an incident response plan, I would say you need to create one. And essentially, this can start with just who is going to respond to an incident, who's going to be on the incident response team, and what threshold triggers the convening of this incident response team. One of the things we do for customers are tabletop exercises. And I think one of the big lessons learned that comes out of those initial tabletop exercises where we practice the incident response plan is that a serious security incident like ransomware or a data breach is way beyond just the IT team. Um, a lot of times you have to disconnect to the internet, which may affect your security. So the physical security people need to be involved in an incident. If you disconnect from the internet, you may not be able to pay your employees. So finance needs to be involved. When your network suddenly and mysteriously goes offline, you're going to have to tell your constituents why this is happening. And so your communications team needs to be involved. If employees are involved, your HR team needs to be involved. And so, what may seem like a very technical cyber situation very broadly impacts the organization. And so the incident response plan needs to have all the relevant parties who might need to be involved in a serious security incident. And it's across the organization. But you're not necessarily going to call the whole team if you've just had, a single endpoint or computer infected with malware. Some things can be contained, and the IT team can handle it. So figuring out where that threshold is for when do we convene the whole team, that's an important part of that one-page incident response plan. And the other thing that I think is super important and should be right on the incident response plan is who are you going to call if you have a serious security incident that you're not able to handle yourself? I will tell you that we get calls from time to time when organizations have had a serious security incident, and essentially they're Googling, who can help me with this security incident, and that is not the time to find a provider for data breach recovery, ransomware recovery, incident response help. You're essentially in a situation where you have no negotiating power. And what a lot of people find also is that the incident response providers are already booked. They're very busy. That's not our primary focus at Mile High Cyber, but I know people who work in that area and they are constantly busy. And if you wait until you have a data breach to negotiate service level agreements, rates, and response times, you're going to be in a very bad position. So get that one-page incident response plan started, and then you can begin expanding it through meetings, discussions, tabletop exercises, and so forth. The other thing that I think a lot of organizations need to have in the response category, and again, this doesn't cost a lot of money, is document the basic steps for things that you do on a regular basis. I think probably most organizations see accounts get compromised once, twice a year, once, twice a month, depending on how big you are, maybe once or twice a week. And so document the steps that you need to do to recover a compromised account. If all you're doing is resetting a password when an email account gets compromised, you're probably not getting the bad guys out of your system. Um, Tokens need to be revoked. Login sessions need to be canceled. User probably needs to be blocked while you're doing all these activities. So there's anywhere from 5 to 15 different steps that you need to take into account to make sure that that account is fully recovered, the bad guys have been removed completely from access, and document those steps, make them a checklist, do them every time. Another one that's pretty common is isolating a computer with malware. Maybe you have an automated system to do that. Document the steps. When a user reports, I've seen something that leads me to believe that there's malware on this computer, or you've gotten an EDR, MDR alert saying the computer's infected. What are those steps? How do you isolate it from the network? How do you rebuild it? How do you move the data and ensure that it's not contaminated with any sort of malware? Document those steps. And then the big one that I think it often comes up during tabletop exercises is how do we disconnect from the internet? I think most people, most non-technical people, maybe the constituents that you serve have this idea that you have a big switch that you throw in the data center that disconnects you from the internet, or there's one giant cable that you unplug. But disconnecting from the internet can be complex, and so you need to document the procedures for doing that, document who has the authority to make that call, and then also, as part of your incident response planning, understand the impact of disconnecting from the internet. We work with some school districts who have had to disconnect from the internet, and some of the unexpected consequences were things like not being able to screen visitors for events. And so, if you disconnect from the internet, you may have to cancel all events, which is going to raise some questions. And so, your communication team needs to be ready for those. So, those are some basic things that you need to document in terms of response procedures. And then the final one, which you're probably not surprised about, uh, your backups. Backups are a huge target for threat actors. They like the backups because that gives them leverage if they're able to destroy your backups in a ransomware situation. But a lot of the backup systems are also high value targets from the standpoint of having administrative credentials and all the information they would need to spread throughout the organization. And so protect those backups um, and test them. Uh, Many organizations over the years have found that when they need their backups, they're not there, and they never tested to make sure they could restore from backups. So these are some low cost things you can do in the response category. All right, so our final poll question. How would you rate your organization in terms of readiness for a serious cyber security incident? Now, if you all say that you've got this handled and documented and you practice it, then you're going to make me out to be a liar. But I'm guessing this is probably the weakest area for everyone.
All right, looks like our responses are in, and I will go ahead and share that. It's quite the mix. Documented incident response plan, informal plan travel knowledge, figure it out as we go.
Yeah, I think the figure out as we would go is what we hear most often. I am impressed that you guys, at least almost half of you, have documented incident response procedures. And nowadays with generative AI, it's very easy to create a initial incident response plan. ChatGPT or Copilot can write that for you. Of course, you need to tailor it to your organization, and that's where the practicing of the incident response plan is going to come into play. Um, and if you're not sure, this would be a good time to work on that. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of different things that you ought to be doing, that you could be doing, that you should do, because we're trying to do this in a low cost way without, breaking the bank. Prioritization is really important. So creating a plan and putting things in priority order is going to allow you to address the most important things first, and then also do them in a way that's not going to require a lot of money or resources. And so I recommend thinking back to the slide about as you're trying to build this bus and driving down the road, the attackers are attacking you. So start with the most important things first. What's going to reach out and bite you first? There may be some exotic things like network canaries that you'll add to your network at some point. Those are not necessarily the top priority. Top priority, as I think you guys already showed that you understand in the poll, is email and identity. That's where you need to put your focus first. Second, internet-facing systems. And then third, as cyber insurance is constantly telling people, remote access, VPNs are extremely dangerous. And if you can possibly reduce or eliminate remote access into your network, that's a good thing. And so as you prioritize things, I would set up a 90-day plan. Start with those prevent measures first, enforce email MFA, and look at those things that people can reach out and touch you from 1,000 miles away. And then second, in a 60-day window, work on your detection measures. And then finally, in the 90-day range, work on some of those response. Now, obviously, if you could accomplish this in less than 90 days, that's great, and I recommend it. But I think within 90 days, you could probably make progress in each of these areas, and you would have tangible improvement in your cybersecurity program without buying a bunch of expensive software, without needing massive projects. So that's the 90-day approach.
Hey, Terry, we have a
Yes,
question. Do you want to go ahead and take it?
yes,
All
I
right.
see this.
Jaden, go
Um,
ahead and ask.
My apologies. I actually didn't mean to raise my hand there.
Oh,
Not a problem.
no worries.
So some of you on this call, and I know we've got probably all different cybersecurity program maturities represented. today. Some of you already have all of these things done, and great. That's awesome. So maybe you're wondering, okay, what's next? So let's talk about that. Um, Once you've done the really basic things, covered the prevent, detect, and respond at a basic level, what I would recommend is doing a self-assessment, or if you don't know how to do it, getting some help doing this, and review your protections against known attacker behaviors. And you're probably wondering, what in the world does that mean? Well, nowadays in 2026, we know what the bad guys are doing. Not only does the government know, I mean, the NSA and the intelligence community has been watching attackers for a long time, but commercial entities and nonprofit organizations like the MITRE Corporation are watching and documenting this. And so MITRE in particular has created a thing called the MITRE Attack Framework. They've kind of put an ampersand as the A in attack um, for branding purposes. But essentially, what the MITRE ATT&CK framework does is documents how bad guys operate. Now, this is kind of like the pirate code. Cyber criminals don't have to follow this in the exact order. They can skip steps, or they can, leave steps out altogether. But essentially, Lockheed Martin identified many years ago that there is a thing called the cyber kill chain. This is the series of events that usually represents what the bad guys are doing. And the MITRE Corporation has expanded that and made it more granular. And for each of these different areas, from initial access into your network or your data to actually causing some sort of an impact, they've documented not only the progression, but specific attack techniques. And so you can drill down as deep as you want to go, and you can go to the MITRE ATT&CK website, and most of the cyber threat intel providers use MITRE ATT&CK as their framework to describe how bad guys operate. And you can start to look at things like initial access, drive-by downloads, exploiting public-facing applications, and start to evaluate your security program based upon these different stages of the attack. What do you have to prevent spear phishing attachments? What do you have to prevent exploitation of public-facing applications? And start to catalog where you have protections in place and where you do not. And those gaps can form the basis of creating a bit of a scorecard. This is an example of a cybersecurity gap analysis that we do for organizations still at kind of level two assessment level. This is not like these things are necessarily working as you intended them, but do you even have things in place to address initial access? Do you have anything to prevent or detect lateral movement, command and control? And so beginning to see where you have weaknesses. Most organizations are pretty strong on the initial access and maybe on the impact, preventing the impact by having backups that are protected. But in the middle, there may be a lot of gaps and blind spots and places where they don't have visibility on what's happening on their network. And of course, having a trained, qualified cybersecurity leader, whether that's a full-time person or a fractional person, is also valuable. After you've identified the gaps, then what we always recommend is to put those into a plan, some kind of a cybersecurity roadmap. So, you've got the gap analysis in place. Okay, let's work on security hardening, security assessment, and security awareness. And we're going to break all those gaps into a long-term plan. This is a 1-year plan. You could create a 2-year plan, but starting to work on some of these more difficult things to address that may require additional budget, that may require a project plan to implement, break that into a roadmap, and then put this into your monthly cadence of reporting and progress checking. And then finally, once you've done all that, then you're ready for one of the things that we do quite a bit of, which is penetration testing. And essentially, a pen test is a third-party evaluation of your security. You know what you've built, you know how it's supposed to work. A penetration test allows a third party to come in and check to see if it's really working as intended. So, are there weaknesses that you missed? Are there mechanisms that are not working as intended? A penetration test can reveal those. And then the important part is fixing them. A lot of customers come to us, they have a requirement for a pen test, and we give them a list of findings and they don't fix them. That's not helping you make progress towards better cybersecurity. When we do a penetration test, typically for a smaller organization, it's a week-long engagement, and you might recognize these steps from the MITRE ATT&CK framework. We try to emulate the exact same things that the bad guys do. We do reconnaissance, we develop some resources to attack, gain initial access, escalate privilege, collect passwords and credentials, and move laterally. Of course, our impact is not a ransomware or data destruction, it's a report. And then we also include optional email phishing if that's something that customers want. We have an advanced reverse proxy that steals not only passwords but cloud tokens to check to see if your multi-factor authentication has some additional layers of protection like conditional access. And so most providers provide something very, very similar to this. All right. So in conclusion, I just want to mention that we're working with several entities here in Colorado that are government clients that can reach out to us through SIPA. Academy School District 20 is our longest standing customer. Been working with them for over 10 years. Denver RTD, Inglewood Schools is a fairly new customer. And we've also worked with a small water district client who remains anonymous because they like to stay below the radar, and we respect that. So with that, I'm going to wrap this up and take any questions, or we can have some discussion time.
Excellent. Well, you are welcome to use the Q&A and chat if you want to just throw your question out there in written form, or if you want to ask a question, please just go ahead and raise your hand and I'll get you unmuted. Terry, I really appreciate that you have that breadth and width of the clients that you can serve. Like it demonstrates you can work with the smallest governments and you can also handle those bigger ones too.
Yeah, I would say our sweet spot is sort of mid-market or, medium-sized organizations because they probably have an IT team or an IT provider that's got things, working and the systems are running and things are handled, but they don't have the cybersecurity expertise to handle improvements or testing their program. And so, the mid to small clients are where we mostly operate. When we get into the larger organizations like RTD, we tend to, do some sort of a niche type project. Maybe something that's a little bit out of the ordinary, testing a particular topic or a particular issue that the CISO is concerned about. And we love doing those as well because that adds a little spice and variety to our lives and makes us think about doing something a little bit unusual.
Definitely. And considering that seems like a lot of special districts are being targeted with the tax right now, it's so important for them to really reach out and get this implemented.
Yeah, yeah.
And we have a question in the chat, in the Q&A. Are any of Mile High Cyber services available through SIPA's purchasing processes? And yes, they are. If you want to go ahead and schedule a call, you can just reach out to Beth. She'll get that organized for you so you can chat with Terry and tell him what you've got and what you're interested in, and he can help you out there. How important is it to have a federated access set up as a first step in the overall cybersecurity domain? From Daniel.
That's a good question. I think that the answer is many times in life is it depends. It really depends on size of the organization and what it is you're trying to accomplish. I will say that a lot of the federated access solutions that are internet facing, those can be a big risk. So I think it really, I would not say that's necessarily always the best first step. Again, having a risk assessment and identifying what that solution is going to do for you and how exposed it is to the internet, I think is important. Sometimes those things need to not be exposed to the internet, in an unrestricted way.
Excellent. Well, thank you again all for joining us. Please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us if you have any follow-up questions, you want to learn more, or you want to get a quote for something that Terry can do for you. We've got some great webinars that are coming up on January 28th with our newest supplier, Boston Consulting Group. February 11th with the Idea Garden, who will go over AI training. February 18th, where your SIPA team will be reviewing our grant programs, the micro grant and the gov grants, which both open for applications in March. So keep an eye out for that to happen. And then lastly, in February 25th, we're going to have the Center for Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency, or better known as CISA, also talking about cybersecurity because it's a very important topic for us this year. Our regional workshops are also back and starting in April in Huerfano County and Delta County. So keep an eye out for those. We've got a whole events page that you can find on our website. We also have some cybersecurity resources there for you if you need it. We'd love to have you join us for any of those events. Check out the resources on our website. Register for all those events that you want to attend with us. Subscribe to and read through our monthly newsletter for some other good tips. And then reach out to us anytime we can help you out. If you want to return to this webinar to view it again or share it with a colleague, we'll be getting it processed and uploaded to our YouTube channel. So keep an eye out for that. And then thank you all again for joining us and make it a fantastic day.
Thanks, everyone.